This is Catherine, so most of you probably know her. And the other person in our group is Rebecca Sofer, who's not able to make it today. But being psychology faculty members, we felt it was our duty to kind of do an experiment that looked at some psychological phenomenon. And one of the things that we thought was fairly big when we looked at our students and when we talked to people was one of the major problems that we see here with a lot of students in the school, and that's sleep. Namely, when we look at Berkeley City College students, not only are they not reading or doing their homework, but a lot of them aren't sleeping either. And that's caused by a lot of different things. One of the big concerns we saw from our students is that a lot of them do have full-time jobs. A lot of them have full families already. They're doing all this extra work on the side. And because they're taking classes and doing all that, something has to go, and what usually goes is sleep. And we know through a number of studies that we've looked at that that can affect them in a number of ways. It can affect their ability to actually focus and do well in class, but just the stressors of their life can have just a major impact on how they function both in a cognitive way and physically with all the different health effects that they have. So if you want to read stuff, there is a list of resources at the end you can look at. If you really want to know how sleep is really being affected from these students and their life choices that they're making right now, but also how these things impact their life is something we've actually looked at. So what we decided to do for our FIG was just ask, how can we help them? And what we really wanted to do in this first experiment is just set the bar as low as humanly possible and see if that's all we need to do. If not, we wanted to see how we could maybe, this would be the next semester, kind of up our ante, try to do a little bit more to help them sleep. So what we decided to do in our study was just split classes up into different experimental groups. So we did an actual experiment where we had two classes actually be presented information that talked about how sleep could benefit them, how different studies have shown sleep is very effectual, where other two classes didn't get anything when we were talking about research methods. They just talked about some other side experiments and sleep was never mentioned. And what we were hoping would happen, and we weren't sure about this, is that that slight mention of sleep would help boost the kids' grades. It would get them to sleep a little bit more for a week and maybe help them in a pop quiz that we gave to all 4 of the classes a week later. We did give them that quiz, and what we found initially was really, really cool. So for the group that didn't have sleep mentioned in it, the average score on a 10-question quiz was about 5.6. The average score on a quiz for the classes that actually had sleep mentioned was 7.08 out of 10. That's still not great, but I mean, that's a huge difference. And any of you guys did a bunch of statistics. We did a t-test, compared them, and essentially they said 1 out of 1,000 chance that this is just random. There's probably a big difference between the classes. I told Catherine this, I told a bunch of other people this, and we were really excited, but it just didn't feel right, so we looked at it a little bit closer, and we ran into a slight problem. Namely, my class was very different from the other classes that were out there. So Rebecca's class and Catherine's class used the same textbook. They were going off the same material. My class had a different textbook, so some of the questions on the quiz weren't perfectly matched up with what we'd actually covered, and we wanted to have the same quiz for everybody. So I did an ANOVA test that looked for whether or not there was one group that was really far from the rest, and we got an ANOVA saying there's a group that really, really, really was different from everybody else. So we looked a little bit closer, and we saw the main difference was in my class, where the average grade was a 4.9 out of 10. Extremely low, very sad for me, because that was my class. But also kind of understandable, because there was some stuff that we hadn't covered. I did tell my students right off the bat that this was going to be a 1-point extra credit opportunity. Just answer as many questions as you could, because I knew it wasn't fair to spring a pop quiz on them with stuff that we hadn't exactly covered in our section. So I think the pairing of them not knowing it and them just completely blowing it off because they heard that it wasn't going to be worth anything was enough to really lower my group's grade. So realizing that that was a problem, what I thought I'd do is make sure that the other classes weren't different and the other 2 instructors did have similar scores. So we said, all right, fine. From here on out, we can do the test, removing me from the experiment and see what happens. And when we did that, we removed my class, the no sleep group still did a little bit worse. Their average was 6.6. The sleep instructions group averaged about 7, but it wasn't significant enough. They're saying it's about a 3 in 10 chance that was just due to chance. Not enough for us to say that's statistically significant. But we have something, we have an inkling, and that was really big to us because that's really all we were setting out to do in the first place, is just set the framework for how we could change this, manipulate things. So we're thinking about maybe doing a replication study where we make sure that everybody's getting the same material. We're also thinking about, as I said earlier, upping the ante. So being more forceful with it, maybe forcing our students, I don't think we actually have the ability to do this, but really encouraging them, enticing them in with extra credit, we don't know how we could do this, to get more sleep for a week and see how it affects their grades, because we know that it should have an impact. It's just we don't know how much we have to do to impact their sleep behaviors, to change things. So we don't know if we're going to give them better instructions, through activities, other stuff, and this is where I'm hoping you guys could help us to try to get these guys to sleep, because we know that this is a major problem at this school, and we know that if we can get them to sleep more, it'll really help them in a number of different ways, not only in school, but in every other aspect of their life. So I guess this is where we open up the floor to questions. So do you guys have any ideas or
places to sleep here?
Choose beds. Teaching at the giving center.
We could make it an assignment to do, to write like a little daily half-page journal, like this is how much sleep I got, this is how my day went, and to actually give an assignment for over 2 weeks. And again, you can't enforce this, but to get more sleep and then write about the effects of that. And then,
that is
just
something
make it
that
an
we floated
assignment worth a
around.
lot of points, but they could bullshit is the thing.
Yeah, that's the thing. Is we did float that around, but we know, if they're not even reading the book and they're not even doing the assignments until 5 minutes before they're due, I'm guessing those logs would be just, in the same writing, same pen, on the same page for an entire 2 weeks, crammed into one little thing. And I'm guessing that might not be honest, but it's a good idea. Yeah, well, lots of hands, whoever.
Well, I was thinking if they did a sleep log and they told them to be completely honest, and then you can take the ones that actually did get more sleep versus the ones that didn't and test them. Look at their scores separately.
That's true. So just give everybody points, just in
Yeah,
general. So even if you say I
just to do a
didn't
log
sleep.
and so they're not getting the points for sleeping more. They're getting the points for
Finishing the log.
keeping the log. Yeah.
I think we need to be a little bit realistic, because I see my students, I encourage them to sleep, but they don't.
Mhm.
So I think I will incorporate another word, resting and taking breaks.
The problem is we know that doesn't help as much. So
But the reason what I'm saying is because I mentioned that the importance of doing it, particularly before they have exams in my class, to take a break, to have a conversation and so on. So maybe they can monitor right away, because most of them are not willing to sleep really.
But the effects are only, and this is in numerous studies, like taking naps, resting, doesn't help cognitive performance nearly as much as getting an entire night's sleep. So you need to hit the threshold to actually have any benefits whatsoever. And that's where, telling them, hey, let's take a nap before we take the quiz.
Do you think that maybe the journal should include the effects of sleeping, taking a nap, and how that really helped me to study and remember? Like maybe if they can include a list of questions that you can give them as part of your journal.
Possibly.
Yeah.
Possibly.
Yeah, I had a couple things I was thinking about. One of them is that in my classes I've heard some students talking about how little sleep they got the night before, and they're trying to up each other.
Mhm.
Well, I got 4 hours sleep. Well, I only got 3. It's almost like a tunnel, because I got fewer hours of sleep. So getting a full night's sleep sort of pansy in their eyes. And I was thinking that, and then I was also thinking that when I'm giving a test, I tell the students, I always coach them, get a plenty of night's sleep the night before, because what'll happen is you'll come in and that one thing that you stayed up all night to try to study, you might get that right, but everything that you knew really well, you're probably going to make silly mistakes on it. But
No, it's a great idea, and there's actually been a number of studies that have explored that, and I teach at Berkeley as well, and drives me nuts because my students really do consider it a badge of honor when they pull an all-nighter. And you're, you know, as a teacher, you're sitting there telling them, this does not help you. You know, you're learning about sleep in this class, and then you go and you don't sleep. It's just really frustrating. But there have been some evidence. There has been some evidence to show. I believe there's an instructor out in Harvard that does an entire 2-hour lecture and gives it to his students at the very beginning of the semester. Boom, boom. And it seems to have some effect. Now the question always is: are they just lying to him because he knows they know he really cares about sleep, or whether or not they're really paying attention to it? But that might be a good next step: is really kind of beating it into their head how unbelievably important it is, especially before exams and others.
Worked really overbooked.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there might be something helpful to help them restructure the way that they handle all these responsibilities, and then working in the necessary amount of sleep, you know, might.
So maybe just have a time management chart
Yes,
instead of saying get sleep, just say
Right. How
you have an
can you do
8-hour
this
block you
better?
have to have.
Right.
Yeah. Figure
Right.
out where to put everything.
Exactly.
It's not a bad idea.
Is this for like is this a research methods class in psychology that this is being attached to?
These
or-
were all intro classes that we did it in, but in the beginning of all psych classes, and this is where we embedded it into it, there's a research methods portion, so we talk about how we do research, general ideas, use example studies, and that's where the sleep study was included in half of
So
them.
is there a way where the students could do a project based on sleep that models that? For example, if everyone in the class keeps track of the number of hours that they sleep, and then they do something related to like a class average, it's sort of an exercise in using some of the research methods?
Are we developing that class still? Has that been killed officially?
Research methods, oh
Yeah.
yeah, we're on.
Okay, good, yeah, so
Awesome.
we are
Okay.
developing a research methods class. I didn't know if it had been slaughtered yet, and on the chopping board with everything else, but that's something that we could definitely include. In fact, we're gonna try to get them to do experiments, and that would be something that's fairly enticing. It's unfortunately, though, something that they're not taking until their second year plus, and for a lot of these students, you know, half of them are gone after their